predictions. When do you reckon we're out of lockdown?
You last said, I think you were saying Christmas last time.
No, they're going to do it a week before Christmas, so everyone can have Christmas, and then there's going to be a massive outbreak, and then we're going to be on lockdown for another 4 months.
I think so. How many months are left to go in a year? Today is August.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the whole of August, September, October. Oh, that's a lot. November. Oh, that's like
5 months.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months. I think it's sort of what, I mean, ideally, we just stay locked down till Christmas. But I feel like it's what the politicians can get away with, right?
That's right. G'day, Stephen.
My mum's birthday is in September, so my sister was like, can we make sure lockdown is after that?
Because
are we live?
Yes, it's one of the silver linings. It's one of the silver linings. I don't know, Stephen. So far, it's one of the silver linings is being able to get out of appointments that you don't want, right? Like you can just be like, oh, I'm really sorry. Well, right now we've got 0 appointments, right? Like you don't have to feel guilty about not going to anything.
Have you felt less stressed for that reason? Because I certainly have felt less stressed.
I have people like daily messaging me being like, let's hang out. I'm like, oh, sorry, lockdown.
And I feel like there is a lot less stress there, but I think the big stress is like I feel guilty whenever I go out, even when I'm allowed, right? So I'm an essential service. When I go to my lab, I feel guilty. The thing is though, when I go out to my fucking lab appointment, like this was Friday, I drove past Roselle and there's hordes of people without masks on at the supermarkets.
Really?
And I'm like, I've been locked at home the entire month, and then there's like a group of, I'll just say it, rich people who just do whatever the fuck they want, and because they're not like locked down in the southwest, they think they're immune to COVID, as if their money is a mask.
I can't believe people are still in supermarkets without masks. That's crazy.
It's technically against the rules.
Yeah, legit. Hey Steve, lovely to have you. Hi Jonathan. We need that Avalon cluster for Christmas. Your appointments are still stressful, but not this one. Not this one. I love this one. And Steve says, I miss some of my friends, so yeah, understandable. Welcome, Devon. We haven't seen you for a little while. Welcome back. And then Emily says, one of my mates has a medical exemption, and he feels self-conscious that people will think he's being edgy.
Because do you, like, when I drive down the street, I judge people not wearing masks.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like, I'm like, why aren't you wearing a fucking mask? And I can see, I've shown it before on my stream. I'm across the road from a petrol station, right? I judge from my balcony.
Or a gas station for Devon.
Gas station for Devon. I look at them and I'm like, yeah, why aren't you wearing your mask? Pretty sure that you're outside of your car, motherfucker. Pretty sure that you're in... I see them.
We have to do a lockdown, but judge others. We have to judge others. We have nothing else to do.
That's right. If you've judged someone fairly or unfairly during COVID, please put a comment in there. I know Devon for a fact has a no mask rider. Because Devon does Uber, right? And there's someone that...
A no mask rider? What's that?
A person who comes into his Uber and doesn't wear a mask.
Okay.
So Devon's a driver.
Yeah.
And then when he picks people up, they just jump in and they're like, sweet, take me to my spot. And they're like, you don't have a mask, bro.
Right. Devon, what do you do? That's an awkward situation. Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, bro, you're not wearing a mask. You're very game because I 100% have COVID.
Amazing. That is the best approach. I totally agree.
Do you ever do that? Like this today, I took the dogs for a walk at the park, which I'm allowed to do. But I'm like, if anyone comes within 1.5 meters of me, I rehearsed what I was going to say to them in my head.
Oh, what were you going to say?
I'm like, please maintain your distance. And when they're like, oh no, it's fine, I don't have COVID. I'm like, well, I do. I work in a COVID lab, so I'm covered in it. But if you're game and you want to come up and pat my dogs, well, go ahead. Like, be my guest. Catch all the COVID you want. I don't care at all. I'm. That's it. The manifestation. I'm just COVID in a trench coat walking around. I actually...
Fantastic. Oh my God.
I actually did it in a store when a guy got really close to me. And I said, no, please stay back. It's for your safety. And he's like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, I work in a COVID lab. And he's like, I'm fine. And his wife was like, she's like, honey, step back.
No, because people as well, once they're committed to being like, no, it's fine, they want to still be like, it's still fine, even when it really isn't, because they want to like commit to their argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Stephen, on that note, Stephen dropped something in there saying that a guy named Kevin Bass tweeted that he wears masks in the car, even when he's by himself, to piss people off, to piss off non-maskers. So I guess there's like sticking to your argument can have two sides, right?
Good, absolutely, just do it. And Devin says less than 25% wear masks in your Uber. Devin, I'm sorry. That's hard. Jürgen Jaeger, is that how you say your name? Because that's a great name. Uber should have a report function, I agree. Emily's going to bring a spray bottle of water for people at the store, and you're going to probably put COVID on the bottle and just be like, yeah, this is my COVID saliva. I put it in the bottle, and come near me and I will spray you. Devin says that they have to report each one.
Now, just before we lose it, Van posted that risk management and the meaning of liberty is quite nuanced, and that he sits in the middle. And this is something that we're continually debating in Australia. Like, how risky are certain activities? What should we be doing? At what levels of the pandemic? And what's kind of like over policed and what's under policed? Because we're not seeing like always consistent messages, I think.
Okay. Yep. And do you have thoughts on what's over and under policed?
So this is a tricky one. I think that the risk of catching COVID outdoors is actually quite low. So I think it's unlikely that things like the protest are really going to have a huge effect. If it was happening all the time, it would be a little bit different. But I think that a lot of the laws around hanging out outdoors, as long as you're kind of spaced a bit, could actually be quite relaxed. Most of the cases we're seeing is like people in houses together and workplaces together, but like no one's catching COVID from going to the beach.
Right, is that so though? Do we know that? Because I think that was definitely true about the other strains. I just don't know it with Delta because it just spreads in the air and, through moisture, droplets and people talking and when you're running past you. So, I mean, I guess, so that's your theory, is it?
I'll say broadly, like a good example of this is Nathan Waters was actually talking about like the fact that he lives in an LGA, a local government area that now has mandatory masks when you're outside the home. His area that he does exercise in is a huge park where he's never closer than 10 meters to someone. He shouldn't really have to wear a mask at this point. Like common sense says there's no way, if he's 10 times the required distance away from someone, his chance of getting Delta is effectively zero. And common sense would say you should be able to take the mask off at that point. Mm-hmm. But if a police officer sees him not wearing a mask, they can fine him.
Yeah, and because as well, it just needs to be a blanket rule for everybody because, I think that we know Nathan's pretty sensible, but we don't know that maybe he's not wearing a mask as well when he goes to the supermarket, so it's not a time when we can look at individual cases and judge them in that way. It just needs to be a blanket rule, I think.
It's tricky when you make rules, you can't really have lots of exceptions. And one thing about risk that we were talking about before is that good risk is actually knowing when to break the rules. Because sometimes, say for example, you're doing an important job with a high degree of risk. We'll just say managing traffic. You're a traffic controller, right? If you're an expert in your job, you know when the rules don't apply. For example, if there was a rule that said, you had to let 5 cars through one way, 5 cars through the other way with no exceptions, if an ambulance came through and you were that guy, you would say, oh no, this is the time I'm allowed to break the rules. And good risk management comes from everyone following the rules, but being experienced enough to know when to break them. And the problem is the people who are breaking the rules now are not the people who have the right understanding of the risk to break it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. see so many of you. Yeah, I like this comment by Jürgen Jaeger. I like to pop a eucalyptus lozenge in before I put my face mask on. Intense freshness. That should be an ad.
Now, on that note, masks are like a thing that everyone has dealt with now, and there's definitely an environment that goes on in between your mouth and your mask, right? What's interesting is there is some new technology coming out, which is called Lab on Mask.
Cool. What's this technology?
So you know how a Fitbit works. Basically, you have like a watch which it measures things. Have you used a Fitbit before?
Yeah, so it's got a sensor for heart rate, for how many steps you're taking.
And blood oxygenation is another one that it does, right? Which is really cool because blood changes color when it's bound to oxygen. So if it's dark, it's got no oxygen, and if it's red, it's got oxygen. So you can measure that using a light and see how much oxygen is in the blood. What they were doing is like, what can we measure in the breath? So we can put some electronics that are kind of like pretty disposable into the masks and then measure all sorts of things.
This is going to be the best though. Imagine, oh hold on, Stephen says, hey Lucy, please increase the volume on your mic. Okay, I'll try.
It might be.
It's just going to be the perfect thing because that's what all the anti-maskers think anyway, that there's electronics in our masks already. So I just love it. Like, we're going to put, they'll be like, we knew it all along. There were always electronics in there.
We'll put a microchip in the mask.
Yeah.
I think Stephen, have a listen. I've put my microphone closer because I don't think that the sound routes through Discord into OBS, which I use for streaming. So we'll see how that goes.
All right, let us know if it's better. Thanks, Steve.
And also something Stephen said that just went was that there's not actually been a whole heap of messaging about share housing. So we haven't heard that, like, have you heard anything about share housing from the government?
No, and I think that's sort of that's a hard basket issue. So, yeah, everyone could fight. I haven't heard anything.
The hard thing is, have you seen the distribution of who's actually catching COVID? It's mostly young people who are in that share house kind of age group.
Oh, really?
So I think it's a bit of a worry.
That's a worry. How many people are we talking in these share houses?
Well, a lot of the cases in the southwest are often families that are living in quite high density, and they're often migrants. And on top of that, they aren't bound to the communities the way we generally think of them. So they're hiding the COVID cases, and we're actually getting deaths that are happening in the home. So there's been at least 4 deaths the last time I looked, where people had tried to hide the person because they were so scared about what would happen because of the negative stigma around COVID. And that's distorting the true numbers. And that's really sad because it means that we as a community, as a country, haven't done the right thing to make these people feel welcomed and included into the Commonwealth.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're totally right. And guys, just letting you all know, I think we spend lots of hours talking about COVID and vaccines. Today, when we're going to try not to talk about vaccines, just to give you guys a fresh take on some other interesting topics in science at the moment. And to pivot, talking about deaths in the home, Meow, you have something to say about deaths in general in another space.
I do. So, also, apologies for any tech or sound issues. We are in mono because of the way that the microphone, I'm using a lapel mic. Hopefully soon we'll be back in our studio with a green...
Put it on your lapel.
It's got no clip. With green screen and stereo microphones and all that stuff. But until now, we're gonna be mono, unfortunately. Now, I've been doing some reading because I'm very, very interested in social networks and especially the death of social networks. Oh, and we're in stereo now. I tried twisting it just a little bit and now we're in stereo. So Lucy and I, we're talking a bit about Facebook and people dying. Now, what's interesting is that when you sign up an account and you die, it doesn't go away, as you all kind of know. What I didn't realize, though, is that there's becoming more dead people on Facebook than there are living people, because the dead accounts accumulate and the live accounts can only be with how many people are alive using it at the time. So it's basically becoming a digital graveyard, which is contributing to it not being trendy.
Because what you're saying is the amount of sign-ups per day compared to the amount of deaths per day is lower.
Yeah, so basically, if we think about it, right? Right now, there's a lot of dead people in Sydney, and our population is growing. But if our population stayed static, after 100 years, there would be more people in the graveyard than there would be alive. And basically, this is being mirrored in Facebook accounts, because there's not, the amount of signups is kind of static, but the amount of dead people, 8,000 a day, just keep on accumulating. And no one really knows what to do with it, right?
So Meow's figure was 8,000 people are dying on Facebook a day. So 8,000 new inactive accounts that will just simply stay there if they haven't appointed a legacy contact for it to be transferred to. And I think that's also, I agree with that as well, because I talked to my brother who is 14, and yeah, he doesn't have Facebook and none of his friends do. It's not interesting to them.
And one of the things that we don't really understand how to do is, I don't think in the West we really have any idea about how to deal with death. Like, just in short, I've been to I don't come from a particularly religious background, right? And I go to funerals, and I think maybe since the 50s, religion kind of started to drop off. But funeral parlors and the rituals around funerals started to become like hyper-capitalistic. So you got massive conglomerates that own all of them. But we don't have cultures we don't have rituals and culture around dealing with death from a non-religious perspective.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Have you been to a funeral, like, say, in the past 5 years? And if so, how would you kind of describe what it was like?
I went to one earlier this year for my cousin. It was interesting because he wasn't he wasn't particularly religious, a little religious, but when his family and I went to create the program for it, we were like, okay, what sort of things are we doing? Are we putting prayers in the program? Are we putting, poems that from the religious school that he went to? And yeah, absolutely. I think it was like, okay, so how much is religion dominating this ceremony? But however, I do think that in times of grief, people want a guide. They sort of want a step-by-step plan as to the right thing to do to honour the dead. So I think that religion can serve that purpose. It can be like, cool, so you say this prayer and then you do this thing, and that's how you farewell them. Because you're right, we don't have our own. We've inherited these Christian British rituals for funerals and for marriages as well.
And the pastor used to serve quite a critical role in here, where he would kind of like, none of the family know what to do during death, so the pastor's like, no, don't worry. First of all, we do this, and then we do this, and don't worry about that aspect because I'm handling that. I'm making sure they're going to heaven. You just concentrate on finding a nice passage, and I'll kind of handle everything around it. And the role of the pastor is more than a religious conduit. It's actually a cultural chaperone, right? And now we kind of pass that on to white lady funerals or whatever, but they don't really care. Like, they're just doing a job. They're not actually part of the community the same way that a religious person is.
Right.
From a tech perspective, though, what's interesting, funeral directors are one of the few jobs that will probably never be done by a machine. not because a machine can't do it, but because we don't want to entrust something of that level of importance to a machine, because it robs us of something that makes us human.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a ritual we all experience in our community and ourselves. But we need to cope with grief. We have to go through these rituals, don't we? It's really interesting.
Definitely. Now, I'm just going to quickly. We've got a few comments. Stephen says that he's very frustrated with Facebook and he's hating it. It blocks so many links, so the algorithm is quite broken at the moment. They're also trying to implement a lot of new features, and I'm just going to touch on this super quickly. There's a big shift amongst younger people to move into smaller social media networks, not really social media networks, smaller ways of interacting using technology, often integrated with bots and AI. So having non-human participants in the bot, in their social circle. And often it's using things like Discord or things like this. And one of the reasons that was hypothesized for this was that our generation, pretty much everyone who's watching this now probably, basically grew up in an era where at the beginning they didn't have access to tools that connected them to people who they lost contact with. Whereas people who've joined the Gen Z below us grew up always being able to be connected to everyone. So they don't miss their friends over the seas the same way that, like, I had a pen pal in high school and I moved away from my hometown and there was people that I wanted to get in contact with. When Facebook came along, it enabled me to do something I couldn't do before.
My pen pal died.
It's no good.
Totally. Yeah, actually, and that was one of the top 5 regrets of the dying. People in palliative care, they often, in the weeks before they die, they miss their friends terribly. They just realise that, through choices they've made over the years, while prioritising family and work and other things, when people have moved away, they haven't maintained those friendships. But in the last 2 weeks before you die, all you want to do is hang out with your friends from what these people's accounts are. But the people whose accounts were taken were people like, older than baby boomers, and they didn't have the technology to allow them to just be like, oh my God, remember that friend I had 30 years ago? Whereas I'm really grateful to Facebook and things like, social media for that, to keep up that connection.
Definitely. And I think as well, you have an idealized version about what some friendships were like when they've ended. And sometimes Facebook reminds you that maybe the friendships, some of them weren't as good. So it enables you to get rid of the FOMO by connecting with someone and going, oh, that's right. They have an irritating habit, or, they got a dumb name that sounds like a cat. Something like this. You can... All it takes is a quick message to remember sometimes why you ended a friendship. Now, just quickly, while we're on the topic, Stephen suggested that we talk about the census. And particularly, now I've got something I want to talk about the census, but he's brought up the topic about religion. There's a big push to tick no religion, and there was also a big controversy over the gender question. It was very binary.
It was very what?
Binary.
Oh.
Now,
Moved on from that.
what's interesting, Marshall McLuhan always talks about the medium is the message. And I think by the government only presenting binary options, it says more about the government than it does about the people's answer to the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And we have Nori May Welby, maybe almost like 5 to 10 years ago, they went and was registered in Australia as the first agender person. So they're considered no gender. And that's legally been proven in court. So you think that the census would reflect that, especially since that was the beginning of a huge kind of opening of cases, or interest and politics around this. It's bizarre they wouldn't include choose not to comment or some other catch-all rather than forcing that male or female question. It seems pretty bizarre.
So the question is just, are you male or female? Is that really it?
Yeah, that's like,